A lot of you know me for my grilled cheese sandwiches. Okay, probably all of you know me for my grilled cheese sandwiches, but did you know that I also love soup? Well, lucky for you, another thing about me is that I love a grilled cheese themed challenge. Since there is no better combo than soup and grilled cheese, I'm going to be creating 3 soups to pair with a classic grilled cheese using no recipes. That's right, today we are relying on my cooking expertise, or lack thereof, to create 3 different and hopefully edible soups. Then I'll taste test all 3 soups with grilled cheese sandwiches to see which tastes the best. Let's get started. I've been told that all of the best soups start with some homemade stock, so that's what I'm going to be doing. Again, I'm not following a recipe here, but I have made stock a few times in the past, so I know that you basically just have to boil a bunch of random stuff for a while, and then you have stock. Also, just in case this does end up tasting good, I kindly asked my girlfriend to write down what I was doing to make a recipe out of it. We only made it about 30 seconds into the cooking process before we ran into the first issue, and that is the pot of water I was going to use is literally smaller than the chicken I'm going to use, so I had to upgrade. But more is better, right? So should not be a problem. I seasoned the chicken with salt, pepper, and paprika, mostly because I momentarily forgot that I was trying to make a stock out of this chicken, and I like paprika, so I threw it on there, but paprika does not really make sense in a stock, so I'm not really sure why I did that. Also, this entire step of searing the chicken before putting it in the pot is probably unnecessary, but I do feel like it's going to add a little bit of depth of flavor to the stock, which I'm down for. I think as long as you get some meat and some vegetables into a pot with some water and you boil it for a while, you're going to end up with a pretty decent stock. Since we're just going to strain the stock once it's done and remove all the vegetables and chicken parts, you can kind of just cut the vegetables into any shape you want. It actually makes you look cooler if you put less effort into cutting them. Like I've seen a lot of pro chefs saying you don't even need to peel the onions, you can just chop them in half and throw them in there, so I'm going to do that because, I'm a pro. Which is actually a kind of funny point because I technically am a professional chef since I do cook and make money from it, which makes me a professional. Now that I think about it, I think that technically means that I'm professionally lactose intolerant too, which is pretty sweet. I'm gonna have to put that on my LinkedIn. A lot of people strive for perfectly clear stocks because it's a sign that you kept it at the perfect temperature and you had the right amount of ingredients and all that fun stuff, but I put paprika in my stock, so we're not gonna get close. As long as this thing turns out wet, I'm gonna be happy with it. I'm fully accepting that this is not going to be a traditional stock, so I'm actually going to add some star anise to this as well, which is technically called anise, but I don't like the sound of putting anise in my soup. So I'm adding some star anise because it is one of my favorite flavors that you can find in a lot of Vietnamese soups, so I think it'll be good in our soups even though we're not making any Vietnamese soups. I feel like I just said soup like 9 times in that sentence. Once I'd boiled it for long enough to fully cook the chicken, I actually removed the chicken pieces and used some forks to separate the meat from the bones, and I'm going to save this so that we can use it in our chicken soup. Then I added the bones back into the stock with the vegetables, and I just kept boiling it for a while so we could really extract any flavor that was still left in them. Then I scooped off most of the oil from the top of the pot and strained out all the nasty bits. And just like that, we have a beautiful stock. I told you could kind of just boil a bunch of random stuff and it would turn out fine. When I was studying finance in college, these are definitely not the stocks I thought I'd be working with in my adult life. Now it's finally time to start making our first actual soup. I'm going to be making a rustic tomato soup. I'm not really sure what I mean by rustic tomato soup, but I'm kind of just going for the vibe of like it's a cold winter day and you walk into a cabin and there's a stone bowl of soup on the table and this is what's inside it. In my head, a soup like that would taste like it was cooked over a wood fire, but I'm kind of too lazy to go outside and build a wood fire, so I'm going to be roasting these vegetables in the oven and hopefully charring the outside a little bit, which should give us that flavor. I'm eventually going to be blending everything that we roast, so I'm cutting off the pieces that I don't want to end up in my blended soup. Once you remove the unwanted pieces, you really don't need to cut anything else because we are going to blend this eventually, but I decided to rip and cut the vegetables into some smaller pieces so that it could be a little bit more Instagram aesthetic. If you're doing this yourself, I would recommend actually peeling the cloves of garlic before you cook it so that way you can just dump everything into the pot because I did have to make sure I removed the skins before I did that. At this point, you might be wondering why I'm not using any tomatoes in my tomato soup, and that's because I am planning to add a can of tomatoes to the soup later because right now tomatoes are not in season. I'm using some onions, carrots, and celery as a base for this soup because that's pretty much how every soup starts, but then I also decided to add some garlic and roasted red peppers to add a little bit more personality because I think that will work very well in a tomato soup. If you like spicy foods, I bet you could add some hot peppers to this too, and it would be fantastic. Now that the vegetables are done roasting, I'm adding it to a big pot, and we're going to make the soup in here. And it was at this point that I was getting pretty excited because these vegetables look beautiful in this pot. Now I'm adding a can of San Marzano tomatoes. I think these are some of the best tomatoes you can get. They're super sweet and taste super fresh. But since I'm hoping to achieve a rustic flavor, I'm going to keep cooking the tomatoes and add a bunch of tomato paste as well, because this is going to take it from a bright fruity flavor to a deep warm flavor. After about 10 to 15 minutes, once the vegetables had darkened and got a little bit browner, I decided to add some of our beautiful chicken stock and turn this thing into a soup. I blended it all using immersion blender, and there we go, we've got soup number 1, tomato soup. Soup number 2 is going to be chicken noodle. Anytime I was sick when I was younger, my mom would make me chicken noodle soup, so I really associate it with being comforting and healing, and I think it's going to go great with a grilled cheese sandwich. Since chicken noodle soup is basically chicken stock with some vegetables, chicken, and noodles added to it, we're actually almost already done with this soup since we made the stock earlier. I'm going to be adding some carrots, onion, and celery because these are the vegetables that you would find in a classic American chicken noodle soup, and for the first time in this video, it is important that I actually dice the vegetables because I'm not planning on blending this soup. I added these all to a pot with olive oil and sauteed them until they softened. And again, because I'm not following any recipes here, I'm just eyeballing all the measurements. I decided to use equal parts celery, carrots, and onion, and I'm just adding broth until it seems about right. I added a little bit of Dijon mustard, but I honestly don't think it really did anything for the soup, and then I added the noodles and the leftover chicken pieces that we had separated before. I simmered this until the noodles were fully cooked, and then I decided that I wanted the soup to be a little thicker, so I made a cornstarch and whole milk slurry that we would use to cook into the soup, and it'll actually make it a little thicker. I added about twice as much milk as I did cornstarch, and it worked out perfectly. The soup was a little thicker and just a little bit creamier, which is exactly what I wanted. I also decided to add some butter because I felt like the soup needed a little bit more fat, and then I added some thyme because I really love the floral notes that thyme adds to any soup. Just like that, soup number 2 is complete, and it's time to move on to soup number 3, and this one's going to go very quick. The third soup is a bit of a wild card. I wanted to introduce something that was easy and quick since these other 2 soups did take kind of a while, so I'm making some instant ramen with a soft boiled egg. To make a soft boiled egg, all you have to do is boil the egg for 6.5 minutes and then plunge it into ice water, and the white of the egg will be perfectly set and you'll have a nice and gooey yolk on the inside. I like to add a little bit of Japanese mayo to my ramen broth because it makes the broth a little creamier, a little fattier, and just more delicious. That's it. We've officially made 3 soups, so let's put these in bowls, add some garnish, and get ready for a taste test. My house was smelling incredible at this point. The chicken soup smelled like anise and thyme, the tomato soup smelled like roasted vegetables and garlic, and the spicy ramen, well, it smelled like spicy ramen, but I like the smell of spicy ramen, so I'm not mad about it. I like to add a little bit of garnish to every bowl of soup I make because I think it's a touch that gives it a completed restaurant quality look, and it's super easy to do. So for the chicken noodle soup, I'm adding some fresh thyme, which should further enhance those herby notes in the soup. For the tomato soup, I'm adding olive oil, some ground black pepper, and some slices of fresh jalapeno. For the spicy ramen, I'm going to be taking that soft-boiled egg we just made a minute ago and slicing it in half and putting it on top. I think there's very few things that are more beautiful than a soft-boiled egg. One of those things, though, is a grilled cheese sandwich. I just made 1 sandwich today, but since we do have 3 soups, I'm cutting it into thirds so we can get a triple cheese pull. My mouth is watering, so let's get into a taste test. I started with the chicken noodle soup, and this was honestly one of the best chicken noodle soups I've ever had, which is some miracle because again, I did not use a recipe for this. However, I didn't feel like this flavor transferred over to the sandwich when I dipped it in. It kind of just made the sandwich wet, so I would say this is not the best grilled cheese dipping soup. Next, I tried the rustic tomato soup, and this one was pretty good, but it did taste a little bit more like tomato sauce than tomato soup. If I was serving this as a standalone soup, I'd probably want to add some cream or milk to make this feel a little bit more like a soup, but since we are dipping grilled cheese sandwiches in this, I'm not going to complain about it being kind of saucy. Overall, it had that hearty, rustic, roasted vegetable flavor that I was going for, and it worked fantastic as a dip for this grilled cheese sandwich. The instant ramen was good, but honestly compared to the other 2 soups, you could tell there was much less effort put into this one. When dipping a grilled cheese into this soup, it did add a spicy flavor to the sandwich, but it didn't add that much of a spicy flavor, and it made the sandwich pretty wet and soggy, so I wouldn't say this is the best either. So if you're going to have a grilled cheese and soup, and these are your 3 options, this is how I would rank them. In third place is the spicy ramen. Grilled cheese and ramen are good on their own, but I feel like combining them didn't really add much value. In second place is the chicken noodle soup. I really love this soup, and although dipping the grilled cheese sandwich inside the soup was not the best play, alternating between the soup and the sandwich is going to be the closest thing you can do to giving your intestines a hug. In first place overall is the tomato soup and grilled cheese combo. This is one of the most legendary food combinations of all time, so I would have been a little bit surprised if this didn't win. There's thousands of other types of soup across the globe, so I'm sure there's other combinations that may be able to beat out the tomato soup grilled cheese combo. Leave a comment if you think you found one, and maybe I'll give it a shot. But that's all for today, so thank you for watching. I love you all, my cheddar children.